Breaking. Trump envoy in Israel as Gaza reports 91 killed seeking aid. July 31, 2025, 3:07 p.m. EDT. CBS, AP, Israeli groups accuse Israel of Gaza genocide. The death toll among Palestinians waiting for food and other aid in Gaza continued to climb as President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff arrived on a visit to the region. Witkoff landed in Israel on Thursday, and the White House said he and U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee will visit Gaza. https on website www.cbsnews.com/Witkoff-Huckabee Gaza survey. Witkoff said at the time that Hamas showed a lack of desire to reach a truce. Over the last 24 hours, at least 91 Palestinians were killed and more than 600 wounded while attempting to get aid in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. This includes 54 people killed while awaiting food in northern Gaza near the Zikim crossing on Wednesday, the ministry said. That figure is expected to rise further, as many of those killed or wounded were brought to isolated smaller hospitals in northern Gaza and have not yet been counted. The Israeli military said Palestinians surrounded aid trucks and the Israeli military fired warning shots, but that it isn't aware of any injuries stemming from Israeli fire. A security official who spoke on the condition of anonymity in line with military regulations said the gunfire came from within the crowd and altercations between Palestinians attempting to access aid. The war began when Hamas attacked southern Israel on October 7, 2023, killing around 1,200 people and abducted 251 others. 50 hostages are still in captivity in Gaza, including around 20 believed to be alive. Most of the others have been released in ceasefires or other deals. Israel's retaliatory offensive has killed more than 60,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza's health ministry, which operates under the Hamas government. Its count doesn't distinguish between militants and civilians. The UN and other international organizations see it as the most reliable source of data on casualties. In Jerusalem, about 50 people, including families of some of the approximately 50 hostages still being held in Gaza, demonstrated on Thursday in front of Netanyahu's office, calling for an end to the war. Israel says it will facilitate the entry of more aid into Gaza. Under heavy international pressure, Israel announced a series of measures over the weekend to facilitate the entry of more international aid to Gaza. But aid workers say much more is needed. The Israeli defense body in charge of coordinating humanitarian aid in Gaza said 270 trucks of aid entered Gaza on Wednesday, and 32 pallets of aid were airdropped into the Strip. That amount is far lower than the 500 to 600 trucks per day that aid organizations say are needed. The international community has heaped criticism on Israel over the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. International organizations said that Gaza has been on the brink of famine for the past 2 years, but that recent developments, including a complete blockade on aid for 2.5 months, mean that the worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in Gaza. The situation has led some leading Israeli rights groups to accuse Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, Yuli Novak, the director of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, said Monday. Systematic destruction of the healthcare system, denial of access to food, blocking of medical evacuations, and using humanitarian aid to advance military targets all indicate a clear pattern of conduct, a pattern that reveals intent, Guy Shalev from the Israeli group Physicians for Human Rights said. Israel vehemently denied the charge. It is baseless, Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer said. There is no intent, key for the charge of genocide. Further pressure on Israel and Hamas as U.S. sanctions Palestinian Authority. In recent days, major allies France, Britain, and Canada have broken from the U.S. in saying they're making plans to recognize a Palestinian state in September. Trump said Canada's announcement, https://www.cbsnews.com/news/Canada-recognize Palestine State, France United Kingdom, Wednesday, will make it very hard for the U.S. to reach a trade agreement with its northern neighbor. Trump said in his post on Truth Social around midnight, "That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada." On Tuesday, Arab countries including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt jointly called on Hamas to end its rule in Gaza and disarm, the AFP news agency reported. The European Union and Arab League countries were among 17 nations that endorsed a 7-page document agreed to at a United Nations conference on a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians. In the context of ending the war in Gaza, Hamas must end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons to the Palestinian Authority, with international engagement and support, in line with the objective of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state, the declaration said, according to AFP. On Thursday, the U.S. revoked visas for Palestinian officials linked to the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization, marking a further deterioration of their relations with the United States. It did not specify which officials would be sanctioned. The State Department said the organizations had violated long-standing agreements not to undermine the peace process or globalize the conflict through international courts. It accused them of inciting violence and supporting attackers and their families. Some of the recent announcements of plans to recognize Palestinian statehood have been predicated on reforming the Palestinian Authority, which is widely seen as corrupt and has little support among Palestinians. The PA has also clashed bitterly with Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza. The PLO, the internationally recognized representative of the Palestinian people, oversees the Western-backed Palestinian Authority, which exercises limited autonomy in parts of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. PLO member Mustafa Barghouti called the U.S. move a response to nations recognizing Palestine and said it proved the U.S. couldn't be a neutral mediator in the peace process. It is time for everyone, including the Palestinian Authority, which along with the PLO is facing U.S. sanctions, to realize that it is futile to bet on the illusion that the United States can act as a mediator, he said in an interview. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. U.S. envoy visits Gaza amidst deadly food aid crisis. Latest updates. Imagine being so desperate for food that you're willing to risk your life to get it. This is the harsh reality for many Palestinians in Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis is spiraling out of control. The latest devastating incident has left dozens of people dead and hundreds injured while waiting for food near a crossing in northern Gaza. But here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. The international community is still struggling to provide adequate aid to the affected areas. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is set to visit Gaza on Friday to inspect food distribution sites and meet with local Gazans to hear firsthand about the dire situation on the ground. This comes after a productive meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where they discussed the dilemmas of food and aid in Gaza. However, the situation remains dire, with Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry reporting 111 people killed and 820 others injured by Israel's military offensive in the last 24 hours. The ministry also reported 2 people dying of malnutrition in the past day, bringing the total number of malnutrition deaths since the start of the war to 159, including 90 children. The UN has warned that the worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out among the 2.1 million population in Gaza. But Israel insists that there are no restrictions on aid deliveries and that there is no starvation. So what's really going on? The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, claim that they have been firing warning shots to disperse crowds gathering around aid trucks, but the Palestinian Red Crescent reports that at least 30 people were killed when Israeli forces opened fire on a crowd waiting for aid. The IDF says it is not aware of any casualties as a result of its fire, but the details of the incident are still being examined. The controversy surrounding the situation in Gaza is far from over. While the U.S. and Israel are working together to deliver more food and aid, many are questioning the effectiveness of their efforts. The UN's Humanitarian Office has said that the tactical pauses in military operations do not allow for the continuous flow of supplies required to meet the immense needs of the population. And this is the part most people miss. The desperate hunger and poverty in Gaza are not just the result of a natural disaster or an economic downturn, but a man-made crisis caused by the restrictions on aid deliveries and the ongoing conflict. As the situation continues to deteriorate, it's essential to ask, what can be done to prevent more lives from being lost? Is it time for the international community to rethink its approach to the crisis in Gaza? The U.S. envoy's visit to Gaza may be a step in the right direction, but it's only the beginning. The world needs to come together to find a solution to this humanitarian crisis before it's too late. But here's the question. Are we willing to take a stand and demand action from our leaders, or will we continue to turn a blind eye to the suffering of the Palestinian people? The clock is ticking, and the fate of Gaza hangs in the balance. It's time to make our voices heard and call for an end to the violence and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Will you join the conversation and share your thoughts on the situation? Hamas halts ceasefire talks as Gaza faces starvation crisis. Live updates. Imagine the desperation gripping Gaza as Hamas steps back from ceasefire negotiations, leaving civilians to face starvation and Israeli fire. The situation is dire, and the stakes are high. Let's dive into the complexities of this crisis and explore the latest developments. Hamas has withdrawn from ceasefire talks, demanding that sufficient aid reach the starving Palestinians in Gaza. This move comes after Israel and the U.S. pulled their delegations from Qatar, accusing Hamas of negotiating in bad faith. The U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and will inspect aid distribution sites in Gaza. This visit comes as Netanyahu faces mounting global pressure to allow more food and medical supplies into the region. But here's where it gets controversial. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on officials from the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization, accusing them of undermining peace commitments. This move has sparked debate, with some arguing it punishes those investigating alleged war crimes by Israel. Meanwhile, several countries, including Canada, Portugal, and Malta, have announced plans to recognize a Palestinian state. This decision follows similar announcements by France and the United Kingdom, adding to the international pressure on Israel. Arab nations have welcomed these announcements, calling them an important step toward peace. Hamas has stated it is ready to return to negotiations, but only if enough aid is allowed into Gaza. The militant group has completely disengaged from talks after the U.S. and Israel pulled their delegations. This has led to a potential shift in strategy by Israel and the U.S., who are considering new approaches to the crisis. The situation on the ground is perilous. Aid delivered to Gaza has led to dangerous situations for residents. Israeli forces fired warning shots near a crowd waiting for a UN convoy carrying food aid, injuring at least one person. The UN has criticized the method of airdropping supplies, calling it insufficient and potentially dangerous. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is worsening. The UN's top humanitarian official, Tom Fletcher, has highlighted massive bureaucratic impediments imposed by Israel, which hinder aid workers' efforts to reach starving Palestinians. He emphasized that airdrops are not efficient and that a flood of aid is needed to address the starvation crisis. The families of Israeli hostages held in Gaza have expressed support for U.S. President Donald Trump and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, in their efforts to secure the release of all captives. They hope for a comprehensive deal that ends the fighting and brings all hostages home. The situation in Gaza is a complex web of political maneuvering, humanitarian crisis, and international pressure. As the world watches, the fate of Gaza's civilians hangs in the balance. And this is the part most people miss. The humanitarian crisis is not just about food and medical supplies. It's about the dignity and survival of an entire population. So, what do you think? Should the international community do more to pressure Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire? Or is the current approach the best way forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below.